I wasn't originally going to do a review for Blackwood's Blue Sky by Eowen Ivey. It's her newest novel. It came out just a few days ago. It was published on February 4th, 2025. I finished it yesterday, February 8th. This is a wonderful book set in rural Alaska. I lived about a third of my life in Alaska. I moved out of there about 10 years ago, and I've never missed it more than I did while I was reading Blackwood's Blue Sky. This made me super nostalgic for the best times that I had back home. The nature writing is really unparalleled, and I really just can't speak highly enough about Eowen Ivey's ability to immerse the reader in an atmospheric setting, from the plants and the animals, the weather, the daylight sun, geography, the icy rivers, the mountains. Everything about the book is just so evocative of the place that I love the most in this world that it was impossible for me not to just completely slip into this with all my heart. It's wonderfully atmospheric, but it's also brilliantly constructed. This story is so much more than what it is on the surface, at least what it appears to be on the surface. It wasn't, like I said, it wasn't until I started reading the reviews for Blackwood's Blue Sky this morning on Storygraph that I started to think maybe I ought to do a video on this, because it seems to me that almost every single reader has missed a really critical part of this book. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So there will be spoilers for this book. I'm going to talk about every part of the story, beginning, middle, and end. And not only that, but I'm going to get at the heart of what I think is the true meaning for this story. I'm assuming that if you're watching this and you don't care about spoilers, it's because you've already read it, so you already know. But if you haven't read it, real quick, it's set in Alaska. It doesn't really say what the time frame is. I'm guessing the bulk of this book is set in about 1990, just based on some hints that you get along the way. It starts off in a small village. It's an unnamed village near the Wolverine River, which is fictional. It appears in her other book, To the Bright Edge of the World. But I kind of like that this is set in the same fictional version of Alaska as she wrote in her previous novel. The main action centers around three characters: Birdie, a young mother; Emmeline, her 6-year-old daughter; and Arthur, the love interest for Birdie in this book. There are three other characters that are tangential to the story, but no less important. They are Warren, this is Arthur's father; Sid, kind of a family friend; and Della, who is Birdie's boss at the bar that she works at. All right, so Birdie is shown to be fairly irresponsible, and that's something that gets picked up a lot in the reviews. She's irresponsible. She doesn't make good decisions. She's a loving mother, but she's not a particularly good caregiver. She leaves her daughter alone while she goes to work the night shift at the bar, and even in the morning when she wakes up hungover on alcohol and cocaine, she goes down to the river, leaves her daughter fishing, or she goes down to the river to go fishing and leaves her daughter back at the house. But the point of this opening scenario is to really illustrate that though Birdie isn't badly intentioned and she doesn't mean to be neglectful, she also can't really be trusted to make good decisions for her daughter. All right, so then Emmeline is a 6-year-old girl. She's very creative. She's also not scared to take matters into her own hands. So we see that she's got kind of a stiff upper lip as well, even when she's scared. And then we've got Arthur. Now, Arthur is like closed off emotionally. He's very quiet. He doesn't interact with the townsfolk. He's awkward. He doesn't have any kind of social life. But Birdie sees him as different. She takes a liking to him. Arthur takes a liking to her. And they eventually fall in love. But Arthur has an incredible secret. He is not human. Or he is. He's half human and he's half bear. He's a grizzly bear. So he spends half his time in human form and half his time as a bear. Now, this is the fantastical element. This is the magical realism. This is the fairy tale element. This is the preposterous situation. This is the myth, right? So it just has to be understood that we're not dealing strictly with reality here, okay? All right, so that leads us to the three side characters, and we'll start with Warren. Warren is Arthur's father. He knows Arthur's secret. The fact that Arthur is a bear is not public knowledge. But Warren also knows that when Arthur was a teenager, he almost killed his best friend. Warren knows that Arthur is dangerous, but he's always held out hope that perhaps this wild nature inside of him would be tamed. So then Arthur invites Bertie and Emmeline out to come live with him out in his cabin. This is way deep in the Alaskan bush. It's 20 miles outside the village. There's no roads out, no trails back. They'd have to hike down the river for 20 miles to get back to the Wolverine Lodge. This is deep country and can only be accessed by airplane. And so Warren has a Super Cub, a little prop job, and he ultimately agrees to take Bertie and Emmeline out there to live in Arthur's cabin. He's reticent about it. He tries half-heartedly to talk Bertie out of it, but Bertie insists, and this is important, that Bertie insists that she's her own woman, she can make her own decisions, and it's nobody else's business how she raises her child or how she lives her own life. And so Warren caves and he agrees. He accepts that argument. From Bertie's perspective, though, it seems reasonable. Nobody should be telling her how to live her own life. But withholding this critical bit of information that the man you're moving in with out in the wilderness is a dangerous bear, Warren and Della and Sid are not allowing Bertie to make a good decision for herself or for her child. This is something she already struggles with. They are complicit in whatever might happen. This, when I was reading the book at first, was my biggest sticking point in the novel. Why wouldn't Warren warn Bertie about Arthur? Why would he let that go on? But I figured it out. We'll get to that in a minute. So they get out to the cabin, and the first impression that Bertie has when she walks into the cabin, it's a mess. It hasn't been cleaned. The stove hasn't been used in so long that there's spiders in it, and lichens are growing on the door. The first impression that she gets is a cold shudder in her heart, yet she ignores it. This is like the first red flag, but she ignores it. And while she's cleaning the cabin, she discovers kind of the second red flag. She discovers the bones of a baby moose squirreled away underneath the bunk. And she thinks it's really weird that, because really only a bear could have done that. But bears don't usually eat their prey inside of human dwellings. And so she finds that to be really strange. But she ignores that as well. And not that she could be expected to guess that Arthur was a bear. Like, who in a million years would guess that the man that they fell in love with was secretly a bear? Like, that's nothing that she could possibly put together, even with all these clues. Okay, but these warning signs still send up red flags in Bertie's heart. And when she brings it up to Arthur, he's kind of dismissive about it. He doesn't directly answer her questions, kind of like everything else. He kind of talks around things. He doesn't quite explain it in ways that Bertie understands. He doesn't think like everybody else. And so she lets it go. Now, this leads us to an intersection of a couple of things that I think are really important. And that's nature. That's physical nature. That's Alaska. That's the bush. It's the wilderness. And that is human nature, our desires, our character makeup. So when looking at Bertie's nature, she tells herself that the reason that she spent so many years drinking and drugging back in town is because she was always trying to chase some kind of an adventure, some kind of high. When she was a little girl, she used to climb up on tall things and jump off. She engaged in a lot of risky behavior because it was a thrill, it was exhilarating. Okay, and so when she started drinking and doing drugs, she found that those satisfied that lust for life that she had. And so now out in the wilderness where she doesn't have all those things, I mean, she does bring a single bottle of whiskey to kind of wean herself off. But the thrill and exhilaration that she finds in living this wilderness life, this survival type wilderness life, where she has to relearn all of her bushcraft. She has to subsist on things that she finds and creates for herself. Haul her own water, build her own fires. There's no electricity, nothing to occupy her mind but herself, her daughter, and a couple of books that Sid sent along. This is exhilarating to her. This is a challenge that she's up for. And to her credit, she manages that challenge very well. She sees to the care of herself and to Emmeline very well. So she finds success there. And she doesn't really express too much difficulty in letting go of the alcohol. She turns to it a couple times when she's upset, but it's not like a big part of the book. It's not like a recovery novel because she's found a great substitution for the drugs and alcohol in this wilderness life. So that is Bertie's nature, okay? And so Arthur's nature, though, is as a human, he's very reserved. He's very closed off. His animal mind and his human mind don't reconcile very well. He speaks exclusively in the present tense because his human mind can't quite grasp linear time. Everything seems to be happening all at the same time to him. All of his experiences all at once. So he remembers his first mother, the bear. He remembers his second mother, Carol, Warren's wife. Even things that happen in his imagination where he thinks about what's going to happen. It's all stuff that has happened. That's all happening it's like simultaneous. But he keeps this a secret. As much as he thinks he loves her, he doesn't tell her who he really is. Arthur lets Bertie fall in love with him under false pretenses. He does not allow her to know him. He only allows her to know part of him. So this is a deception. And it's a deception that is perpetrated by Arthur, by Warren, by Sid, and by Della against Bertie and Emmeline. And it's a dangerous deception that will have dire consequences. Now, I saw a lot of people comparing Blackwood's Blue Sky to Beauty and the Beast. They call it a fairy tale. But in Beauty and the Beast, Belle knows the Beast is a beast. She knows what she's getting into, and she falls in love with him anyway. And the resolution of that story is an idealized version of possible events. That is not what happens in Blackwood's Blue Sky. Bertie is deceived. She falls in love with a dangerous man. She's not warned by anybody who knows the truth, and she even ignores the red flags in her own heart. This story is more maybe like Jekyll and Hyde than it is Beauty and the Beast, but it for certain is not a fairy tale. Blackwood's Blue Sky is not a fairy tale. It is an allegory. So I wrote this down here. Fairy tales are usually fantastical stories aimed at children, improbable tales, sometimes scary, but tend to end with the ideal happy outcome. An allegory is a fictional story symbolic of a general aspect of human nature or a meaningful historical event. So what aspect of human nature is this an allegory for? Blackwood's Blue Sky is an allegory for abuse. Now, to be clear, this book is not about domestic abuse or that kind of violence. This book is an allegory for those things. So when I talk about the abuser and the victim and the enablers, I'm not literally saying that Emmeline and Bertie are abuse victims. I'm not literally saying that Warren, Sid, and Della are enablers, though they kind of are. So I'm not talking about SA. I'm not talking about battery. I'm not talking about any of those things that actually... Those things don't actually happen in the book. They're not mentioned in the book. They're not depicted. They're not hinted at. None of that. In fact, especially with Arthur and Emmeline, the 6-year-old girl, he's very tender with her. He's very respectful of her. He takes care of her. He teaches her about the world. He cares about her very much. And he is never inappropriate with her, ever. So none of that happens in the book. But I still believe that this is an allegory for the opposite of that. And let me explain why. So between Bertie and Emmeline, Emmeline is the first to discover Arthur's true nature. She's playing out in the shed, and she's looking through like a little knothole in the shed wall, and she sees a bear. She's watching it, and she's kind of scared. And the bear stands up, and out of its skin steps Arthur. She can barely believe her eyes. This is a crazy thing. She wonders if she's imagining it. Now, this isn't really graphic by any stretch of the imagination, but Arthur steps out of the bear skin in his human form, and he's completely naked. Emmeline sees his penis. This is the first adult male penis that she's ever seen, and she's filled with shame. Immediately after feeling that shame, she questions whether or not she should tell her mom about this. Is this a secret that is okay to share, or is this a secret that she should keep? A good secret or a bad secret? She decides to keep Arthur's secret. Now, in the story, Arthur has nothing to do with convincing Emmeline to keep the secret. He is responsible for keeping the secret himself, but he doesn't have anything to do with Emmeline's decision to keep it a secret. But oftentimes, in real tales of abuse, the abuser will intimidate the child, make them feel shameful so that they don't share their secrets. And so this is the first indication that I had that perhaps Blackwood's Blue Sky is an allegory for abuse. Now, later on in the story, when months later, when Emmeline finally tells Bertie the truth, she tells her mom the truth. She tells her what she knows about Arthur. She even takes her mom to the place where Arthur keeps his bear skin, and they pull it up, and she sees this skin there. There's no reason for that skin to be there. Arthur's never mentioned it before. It's still kind of beyond what you might expect a person to reasonably believe. Would you believe your 6-year-old if they said that your boyfriend was a bear and here's his skin in the woods? Bertie is really overwhelmed. So in the story, it makes complete and total sense why she wouldn't believe her daughter. She actually gets kind of mad at her for creating lies. Emmeline is known for her creativity, but this time she's gone too far. But in real abuse situations, when children make one of their parents aware of ongoing abuse, they tell their secret. Sometimes that parent, the one who's not committing the abuse, will deny the truth. They won't believe the child. They will instead find reasons why it couldn't be true. They will delude themselves into not believing it because they don't want to believe it. They love their partner, or they're in a precarious situation that they can't leave. Precarious like being 20 miles into the Alaska bush with no way out. She's not totally reliant on Arthur in the story because Arthur goes off on his own a lot and she handles things on her own just fine. But she doesn't have a reliable way out. She has to wait for Warren to fly in. They could hike out, but it'd be an extremely treacherous trip, especially with a 6-year-old in tow. So Bertie doesn't believe Emmeline. But Bertie's denial of the situation doesn't really hold up for very long because she soon discovers the truth for herself, that Arthur is a bear. But by the time she learns this, it's kind of too late for Bertie because she has fallen in love with him and she doesn't believe that Arthur would ever hurt her, even when he is in his bear form and he's got the same instincts and appetites as a real wild grizzly bear. She doesn't see that. And because nobody in her life who knows the truth warned her about this, she is only going by the instincts of her heart, what she really wants to believe. And so when Arthur in bear form slaps her across the face and it like his claws catch her and it gouges like this, she's got this big nasty chunk of flesh falling off her cheek. Instead of coming to the realization that the bear is actually in fact dangerous and it poses a threat to her and her daughter, she rationalizes the situation and thinks to herself that it was an accident. He didn't mean to do it. He didn't mean to use his claws. So she goes after him. The bear runs off into the woods. He's wounded, and she goes after him. I don't know how many times previous to this moment we're told in this story that Bertie knows about bears. She knows how dangerous they are. And there's one specific passage that comes not too far before this scene that specifically says you don't pursue a wounded bear. So like hunters, if they don't take the bear down with one shot and they have to pursue a wounded bear through the woods, they're taking their lives into their own hands. Birdie knows this, that a wounded bear is the most dangerous bear, more dangerous than a sow protecting its cubs. But she disregards an entire lifetime's knowledge of bear danger and instead has rationalized the fact that she doesn't believe that Arthur would really hurt her, even though he already has, and he's just gashed her face open. She pursues him into the wilderness, and he kills her. Now, in a different story, one that depicted literal abuse, you might have the same kind of thing happening. You might have a child who feels shame, keeps a secret of the abuser, and when they break their silence and tell the other parent that the abuse is happening, that parent won't believe them, perhaps, because it shakes their whole worldview. It shakes up their whole situation. They're in denial. They might also repress their own instincts about the abuser. And when they are abused, when they suffer physical abuse, they might rationalize it and say it wasn't his fault. He didn't mean to. He would never hurt me on purpose. And now this isn't victim blaming. I'm not doing any of that, but I'm just saying that this happens in real life all too often. It's just the sad nature of reality that some of our natures will lead us to rationalizing the things that are dangerous, that pose dangers to us. It's just a sad reality that in some people's natures, they cannot control their violent tempers. Some people are dominated by their emotions. They are not able to contain them or control them. Perhaps for a time they can, but because they deny it themselves, they keep it a secret, they don't share it, they don't try to get better. Ultimately, that almost like instinctual rage within them will come out, and it will hurt the people in their lives. Even if they love them or they think they love them, it'll still happen. And that's just the unfortunate reality and nature of abuse and victims. And then we come to the people on the periphery, the enablers. So in reality, you have people like Warren, the family member who knows the truth, but is so deluded into thinking that maybe they can change that they are willing to put innocent people at risk. And then you've got other people like Sid and Della who are kind of in the same boat, but they see an impossible situation. They've known the abuser for so long, since they were a child, right? They want so badly to believe that this person is a good person at heart, that when the newcomer comes in, they prioritize keeping the secret of the abuser, the dangerous person, over protecting somebody who is oblivious to the situation. That happens too. So that's pretty heavy stuff. I wanted to say, though, that in a fairy tale, you have the idyllic outcome. Now, at the end of this book, it's 15 years later, after Bertie is killed. Emmeline has gone to live with her aunt down in Washington. She's grown up now. She's graduated high school. She's just graduated college. She's degreed in plant studies. I think she's a botanist. And she decides she's going to road trip up to Alaska. She's going to go visit this old village where she lived when she was 6 years old. And she does. She goes up there. And she runs into Warren and Della and Sid. She convinces Warren to take her out to the cabin. Now, Warren hasn't really learned his lesson, because Warren has yet another secret, and that's that he's keeping Arthur in bear form alive. He lied to authorities and told them that the bear responsible for mauling Bertie and killing his son has been killed. But they shot it from a plane or something. They couldn't go recover the body or something like that. Now, Arthur's body, they said, was never found, but they allowed the world to think that Arthur was another victim of the bear. So there was a massive cover-up, which is a whole other part of the allegory of abuse, the subsequent cover-up. Have we ever seen cover-up scandals play out in the world? So Emmeline, now she's like 24 or something like that, maybe 23 years old. She comes face to face now with the bear that killed her mom, and she realizes that her memories of Arthur being a bear and a man and the one responsible for killing her mom, that was real. When she was a child, she told everybody what had happened, but because the coroner's report clearly bared out that Bertie was killed by a bear attack, nobody in authority took Emmeline's story seriously. It couldn't have been Arthur that killed Bertie because there's teeth marks and claw marks, and is clearly a bear. So nobody believed the 6-year-old girl. Nobody believed her version of the story. So she grows up with therapists and family members telling her that what she remembers isn't true. So much so that she doubts herself. She has vivid memories of this. She remembers Arthur being a bear, but she starts to believe that she's conflated the story. She's a creative child who's struggling to make sense of a traumatic event, so she doesn't even believe her own memories anymore. She doesn't think that they're reliable until she sees the bear for herself, and she realizes that she was right all along, that her version of events was true. She has this epiphany, and she's kind of shook by this. Now, this video is already pretty long, and I don't really want to go into too much about what happens out there at the North Fork cabin where Warren has built this pen for his son, the bear. I think I was talking about fairy tales. So in a fairy tale, you have this idyllic ending, where it's the end of the fairy tale is usually the ideal ending to the story. You think, like that's like the Disney version of events. Grimm's fairy tales are a little bit different. That's the ending of Blackwood's Blue Sky ends with some catharsis. It's not completely bleak at the end. Emmeline considers killing the bear a couple of times. Ultimately, she in this story, and we're not talking about the allegory of abuse here, but in this story, she remembers the good times with Arthur. When he was a human, he was really good to her. And he, not only that, but like he instilled in her a lifelong love of nature. It's why she became a botanist. She knows all the scientific names for plants, and she's going to dedicate her life to the study of plants because Arthur gave her that gift. Arthur also killed her mom, but as a bear. So in this story, she has a hard time reconciling the two halves of Arthur and decides to have pity on Arthur and forgive the bear. So she lets the bear out of the pen, and the bear walks past her. He doesn't have any he doesn't make any violent action towards her. You kind of get the sense part of Arthur's humanity has come to the fore in the bear. And even Warren says that he thinks the reason that he's never turned back into a human since the time he killed Bertie is that some part of him, even in bear form, knew that he had made a grievous mistake, that he did the worst possible thing, and he's got a lot of regret. And so he punishes himself by staying in this bear form and never walks as a human again. I think that goes a long way toward Emmeline being able to forgive the bear. Anyway, the bear leads Emmeline out on this long trip. On a long hike. They get up to this spot. They lay down under a blue sky. And Arthur dies. He breathes his last breath. He dies up there. But while he's breathing his last breath, Emmeline takes hold of his claw. She feels like human-like fingers, the bones in his claw. She remembers Arthur, and she's forgiven him. And she finds catharsis there. And this is directly referenced in the epigraph of the book. Okay, so the epigraph that Eowen Ivey uses is from Marcel Proust. I'm just going to read the whole thing to you here. It's 5 kind of poetic lines. And it says, "Now are the woods all black, but still the sky is blue. May you always see a blue sky overhead, my young friend. And then, even when the time comes, which is coming now for me, when the woods are all black, when night is fast falling, you will be able to console yourself, as I am doing, by looking up to the sky." In bear form, Arthur doesn't say anything up there on the mountainside before he dies. He doesn't say a word. He just breathes heavy and expires. But if he had spoken those exact words from Proust, used in the epigraph, to Emmeline in that moment, it couldn't have been more appropriate. Blue skies representing clarity of thought, the best of the world, the best days, the best memories, the goodness in life, the comfort that you take in love of others. So even when the woods are black, the trauma down below at the bottom of the mountain, where the worst things that ever happen, you can look up to the blue skies and be comforted, even in your dying moments. I wouldn't say that's a happy ending, but it's a cathartic one for Emmeline. She's able to forgive the person who killed her mom. She's able to move on with her life. She feels like she's got some direction and that she found closure. But catharsis does not equal a happy ending. And so this is not a fairy tale. It is an allegory. And in reading all of these reviews on Storygraph, I was just a little discouraged when people were complaining about Birdie not being a likable person. She makes bad decisions. She's not a good mom. It doesn't make sense. Why wouldn't Warren tell her about Arthur? Why did everybody keep it a secret? Well, it's a reason for that. On a surface level story about the kind of doomed lovers moving into the wilderness, putting a young child at risk. But before everything goes south, they're savoring nature, they're savoring each other, savoring their independence, living wild and woolly on their own terms. For me, personally, the idea of living out in a cabin, not forever, but for a summer sounds awesome. I would love to retreat into the wilderness for a period of my life and live like they lived in this. I can absolutely see the appeal. And so if that's how you read the book, that's fine. But I think that the more rewarding reading of the story is to go that next level down. One of the things that I really enjoy about books, the best books, is that they explore the big questions in life. And sometimes they leave me with more questions than answers, and that's okay. But what they do is they offer a new way for me to contextualize those questions, to think about the answers, like a new lens through which I can view the world. This is a thoughtful book. It's got me thinking about a lot of really important things, from the nature of storytelling itself, the structure of a novel, the beautiful nature writing, the descriptions, the balance of characters and plot and bushcraft and description and dialogue and the switching between perspectives. The construction of this book is just wonderful. It's crafted so well that I'm just really impressed by that, while also still being super accessible. It's easy to read, even though there's depth and complexity on different layers. It's just remarkably well written. It's remarkably well conceived. It's just a joy to discover a book that's this good. But maybe even more importantly than all of that, Blackwood's Blue Sky has something really important to say about our human nature, self-deception, and the perils of self-deception. It has something important to say about the perils of keeping secrets. I found the themes to be deeply meaningful to me. I hope that other readers will also find this kind of meaning in the book. But I don't know that they will. And the reason I say that is the one thing I don't like about this book is the cover. This cover, this illustration style, this kind of cartoony illustration style, This might be a divisive opinion, but I think the publishers are catering too much to the book talkification of literature. This is a serious book, and it looks like a fairy tale cover. It looks like a whimsical story. Contrasted to the cover for To the Bright Edge of the World, this does not look like a whimsical story. This does not look like a fairy tale or anything. This has an appropriate cover, I believe. We judge books by the cover all the time. Of course we do. The cover art of a book makes just as much of a promise as the book blurbs and the summaries on the inside flap. And, on here it says, and this actually says on the inside flap, that this is an unforgettable, dark fairy tale that asks the question, can love save us from ourselves? It qualifies it by calling it dark, but it just paints the wrong picture. And so it sets readers up to get the wrong idea from the get. And I know I can be critical and judgmental of other readers. A loud voice in my head says just because you can read doesn't mean you're literate. I can get really upset when people don't understand a book. I didn't find it immediately obvious while I was reading it, but I finished this lesson 24 hours ago. I just thought about it while I wasn't reading it. I started putting pieces together, and I started exploring kind of uncomfortable territory, and I let my mind go down those rabbit trails. Here's the thing. Once a writer publishes a book, it no longer belongs to that author. The story now belongs to me, or the reader, whoever you are. The story belongs to me, it belongs to you. And each one of those instances of ownership are unique unto themselves. How it is up to me, it is now my prerogative to interpret this book. It's almost my mandate to find my own meaning in a story. And whatever I think it means, that's what it means, at least in this distinct instance of ownership. This copy of this book that belongs to Eric, this is an allegory for abuse. And I have a hard time making room for other instances of ownership. Other readers have their own idea of what their book is about, their copy of Blackwood's Blue Sky. What does it mean to them? Because whatever it means to them, it means that's what it means. And it's just as real as my meaning is to me. So I have to kind of let go some of that judgment, some of that criticism that I have of other readers. But you can get so much more out of a book when you put your thinking cap on and you just engage with literary analysis, interpretation of themes. The stuff that they taught you back in high school that nobody pays any attention to then because it's boring. Anyway, I'm just rambling now, so I'm going to end this video.